What's going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the third album by British band Coldplay. This album came out in the spring of 2005 and it's called X&Y. And this is a particularly tougher project to kind of get reviewed and stuff just because I'm not too familiar overtly with Coldplay's music apart from like the song Speed of Sound and like Clocks and some of those type ones. I would have to say I wanted to see what it's about because Coldplay is definitely more of like a thinker's band. They have a little bit more intellectual type premise about them. They're not quite as jivey as like Maroon 5, which I think I do see some similarities between Coldplay and Maroon 5, but they're just less contemporary and a lot more kind of bookstore, coffee shop, Panera Bread, those type places, just more bread store kind of just more intellectual places where you'd see some of that Starbucks and just more places like that. And I kind of wanted to see what was up with their music just because I know that they've seen like a lot of accolades, particularly like their 2008 album, but this album did pretty well also. This X and Y album from 2005 got a lot of accolades also. So I wanted to see what was up with that. And from what I gathered from this project, it is pretty solid. It's a little bit more it's kind of more, it's not quite as contemporary as I would have liked it. And I think that's kind of the detractment. That's the biggest detractment from it. I mean, it does it, but it does it with such finesse that I guess it kind of had like the vision that it didn't really need to do it as much. I mean, there is some kind of jivey and more contemporary moments, but they're just tougher to spot just because this is kind of a brainy album in a lot of ways. And just would have to kind of say it was a little bit more difficult to figure out which songs were kind of the more dance cuts, the more contemporary ones, and the ones that were kind of meant for more of like grooving and that type of stuff. But there are some on here if you look hard enough, and I'm going to definitely point these out. But this is kind of like, I definitely feel like for the British commute, this was an easy kind of day commute and kind of work a day, blue collar kind of album, that type stuff, I just would have to say. But it does have a decent dab of nightlife in there that kind of has some extra type stuff for it. It just does not overtly like advertise it as much as it could. But I do think Chris Martin at least had some of those ideas in mind. But it does have some pretty powerful four singles that were pretty strong. At least Speed of Sound charted real well in the United States. One song, Fix You, hit 1 billion plays on Spotify. So I didn't really know about that song that well, but apparently that's kind of saying something. Must have been living under a rock to have not seen a song that hit 1 billion plays and stuff. But just to kind of talk about the fact of the matter is I kind of want to see what's up with this record. So we're going to kind of get to that. So the singles would be Speed of Sound was the first single, and I remember this song from back in the day. Has a pretty stellar piano ballad type esque thing in the chorus and stuff. Definitely has a pretty signature type sound for that, pretty similar to Clocks and that sort of thing. But I definitely see this song, I definitely see Speed of Sound as like a bookstore and blue collar kind of evening venue kind of vibe. Definitely kind of got that expression from it. It just has kind of like this pounding drum in that, like, kind of has like this pounding drum in the song. Definitely something that's just kind of more of a thumping type one. It's not really a rock song as much, just kind of more pop rock, more emphasis on the drums and the pianos and that sort of thing. But I definitely would have to say it's a pretty signature song for Coldplay, just an overall hit, and I kind of like the concept behind it. Definitely like the concept behind it and that type thing. It's just it really kind of stands to reason. This one's not like a nightclub song, definitely not one that I would play in like a dance club, something like that. But it does kind of have like the energy of just being out and about. But it's just kind of a lot more breezy and air and running, a lot more just mid commute and evening kind of commute as far as that kind of goes. It's just kind of something that you would hear in like a bookshop or a coffee shop, something like that. This is what I talk about with this kind of more brainy kind of aspect about it. But I do appreciate the sophistication of this song. It's a different kind of vibe from a lot of stuff I've been messing with in like some context, but I just would have to say it's a nice one to kind of have an extra rhythm to kind of get a more fancier appreciation. Fix You was the second single. Fix You was the second single, and this one is, like I said, this hit 1 billion plays on Spotify, so a lot of people seem to really like this song and it connected. I see it as kind of like a dreary, kind of sleepy bar night venue kind of song that's kind of moving. I definitely see this as like a movie. It's an emotional song, definitely kind of a strong, trying to connect with you kind of song, but it's a very moving one in that sort of sense. But I saw it as very sleepy. I just think that the production on this song is not quite as upbeat as like Speed of Sound, but it does kind of have like that dreary kind of organ feel towards it, and I kind of like the overall sleepiness of it. But it just reminded me of something that you'd listen to at a bar after like the night's almost over, like maybe the woman leaves and you're just left there, which you can gather whether the night went well or the night went bad, but just kind of the concept as far as kind of that pick up and pace as far as trying to talk about that, just kind of in the context of like standard nightlife and just kind of the dreariness of just kind of the standard nights out and the dreariness of nights out with women and that sort of thing. But it's just an overall sluggish song, and I kind of like the sleepy kind of feel towards it in terms of just being like a dreary kind of bar type song, especially in the romance of the night and that sort of thing. It's just kind of one of those ones that you'd hear constantly throughout like hazy summers and hazy springs and that type of stuff. Just works in that sort of context. So many situations it can be played. I mean, this is probably this is the more go-to song I would say than Speed of Sound, where Speed of Sound's more of like the daytime commute and kind of more at work or just kind of more platonic and less kind of hands-on. But I feel like Fix You is kind of more hands-on, more personal, and just more kind of hands-on and close to home, hits closer to home and that sort of thing. This is kind of the situation. The third single is Talk, and this is a commute song. This is another one that's similar to Speed of Sound. Talk is a similar one to Speed of Sound. This has that same kind of bleary type vibe about it. Definitely a commute song. Maybe not quite as evening bound, but definitely one for just like kind of more workaday or just kind of more sophisticated places, places that would be like Starbucks and like other coffee places. Can't really think of them like Dunkin' or someplace like that, even though Dunkin's not quite as sophisticated as Starbucks. I would just have to say coffee places, just mild coffee places you find in like airports and subways and those type places, bookstores, shopping malls, strip malls, fancier shopping malls on like the East Coast of the United States, that sort of thing. It kind of works in that sort of context. I would definitely see it as like really just kind of on foot kind of travel type thing. Is kind of more suitcase and work hat kind of vibes about it, but it's just very bleary, and I like the concept behind it. It definitely, I mean, this is not Speed of Sound and Talk are both not party songs and get crunk kind of songs, but I definitely see them as like a necessary kind of, I definitely see them as like a necessary blue collar kind of vibe as far as trying to have the work a day for folks who do actually have to have responsibilities and that sort of thing. So it's good to have two powerful singles in that context. The fourth single is The Hardest Part. And this one was kind of trickier to describe at first, but I kind of see it as like a food court kind of song. This is kind of more of like a hard time in the relationship kind of song, but I see it as kind of like a song you'd listen to in the food court or work a day kind of errand running and coffee shop type music. It's definitely, I mean, this is not quite as day shift and work type oriented as Speed of Sound and Talk, but I kind of feel like it's still in the same valve as being able to hear some of these. Like this album has a lot of good cuts for just the standard commute and like settings where you're just out in public during the daytime, but it just kind of has the same context as far as like it kind of has the same idea that this one's just a little bit more personal and bruised, where the other two songs were at least kind of peppy, kind of just not so much like moody kind of songs as much, but this one's a little bit more bruised in energy as far as that kind of goes. So maybe it's not like the go-to cut to play for like a standard job session if you're not kind of going through the wire and just kind of having more substandard problems as far as that kind of goes. But it's definitely coffee shop music, definitely errand running, food court kind of music, that sort of thing. If you're getting lunch in the food court, something like that, just works for that sort of sense. And then so I'm going to talk about so I'm going to recommend the 6 songs out of 13 I recommend to you, and those 6 songs would be Speed of Sound, Talk, The Hardest Part, Fix You, Low, and White Shadows. So the only 2 songs I haven't talked about that I recommend to you would just be Low and White Shadows. White Shadows is really kind of like a mid-rave number. I really like the energy of this one. This is the type of song I would definitely like to see Chris Martin and Coldplay make a lot more. It's had a real paced energy, nice dance cut, felt like kind of a mid-rave kind of number. This was an overall kind of one that I would think even like a esteemed British character like James Bond could probably dance to in one of his movies or something like that. It just would be kind of interesting, kind of get that. It's a real nice kind of blue blood, but still fancy. Just any kind of overseas, over in Britain and Europe, these type folks could dance and have rave type moments to this. And even in the United States, this would be a nice rave number. And then Low is another nice one. This is kind of more of like a standard dance club cut, but I do like the pace of it. It's very dreary, has a kind of has very kind of dreary kind of production on here. It just has like very light guitar licks on here. The thing about a lot of this album is it's not as much rock oriented. It's not really like a riff heavy album. I think the closest song that I like that has like some sort of riff on here is just Low that I noticed, although I did like some of the work in White Shadows. For the most part, this is kind of more like it just has a different orientation and kind of production values on here. A lot of piano type stuff. I think Chris Martin plays the pianos. A lot of more kind of dreary and just drum sounding type stuff. Does not really have like heavy kind of electric or like shredding guitars and that sort of thing. It's not a metal album. I just would have to say it's not metal. And I noticed that, and it's just kind of interesting, but it's barely rock. I mean, that's the thing. It really just feels like pop with like a light tinge of rock in here, just the way that it kind of works. It's different from a lot of stuff that I've heard in like pop music, or at least pop rock kind of music. It's just interesting kind of get that, because I feel like some of these more lighter tinged and book smart and more coffee shop kind of vibes just have a different vibe, because it would sound strange to hear in Starbucks like Metallica or like Papa Roach or like Korn or something like that. So it's just interesting to see that this is kind of more Panera Bread and places like that kind of music, and Panera Bread and Starbucks kind of music, and some of those bookstores and that sort of thing. But it works for what it is. So I just would have to say the problem with this album, though, to talk about some of the moments I didn't like, there's some moments like Swallowed in the Sea, A Message, and What If that kind of had a lot more sluggish kind of feels towards it. There were a lot more, like, I like Coldplay, but they are kind of a difficult band to like wholesomely approach, just because they have a lot of, like, if the singles are intellectual and kind of more paced and require more constructing and that type of stuff and analyzing, I feel like the album cuts definitely do that like threefold as far as that kind of goes. So it's just not, when it's not something that's more contemporary or dance ready like White Shadows or Low, it just kind of comes off as a lot of thought processing, and it just means that their ballads and down tempo songs are going to be a lot more definitely kind of down tempo and emotional in that sort of sense. It's not like emotional is bad, but just kind of the context, there's going to be a lot more felt in those sorts of ways. So it's just kind of, they have like an extremity towards that, just with their kind of more powerful lyrics and emphasis and that type of stuff. So there's just like some stuff in here. It's just very much an intellectual project, but that kind of makes their album cuts kind of off-putting, because I would have liked more moments. Just with 12 songs or 13 songs, it's kind of short to the point, where you just don't get a lot of moments and a lot of room to really see some stuff in terms of like them stepping out and having some times. Because even in the singles, 3 out of 4 of them are meant for like the daytime commute and blue collar type stuff, and the only real single that comes close to anything in like a nightlife and dance club kind of oriented is just Fix You, which Fix You is not even a dance song. It's just kind of a bleary, getting ready to go home kind of dance club songs. That's just kind of the concept there. But you have to look to the album cuts to get your dance fix, which would be White Shadows and Low, and there's really no other songs like it, which is kind of a complaint for me. And then there's just some other ones on here like Till Kingdom Come and Twisted Logic that just kind of have bad instrumentation. And I really would have liked a better sound that just sounded more jivey and contemporary, just something that could have broken them out and had them have a little bit more electric kind of feeling. Because a lot of this is just very sluggish and kind of wallowing in like a lot of ruminating that's just way maybe more introspective, maybe 2 or 3 notches more introspective than it needed to be. And if you're not here for like that depthy ruminating, it kind of is another blow to take to the album. So, but yeah, so I'm gonna give this album, me liking 6 songs out of 13. I'm gonna give this album a 5.5 out of 10. I feel like that's pretty solid. I liked all the singles and 2 extra songs on here, but out of 13, that's still over half the album that I didn't like. So I just would have to say 5.5 is pretty good. The social score I'll have to give like a 4.75 though, just because I feel like it definitely could have used more. I mean, the singles are social, but in terms of stuff that you could listen to with your buddies and that type stuff, or women or that type stuff, it's just not very overly abundant. And I think that's just kind of the thing is most of the singles are meant for work and commute and errand running and just standard responsibility type stuff. But the only three songs I would really say for any sort of night and stepping out recreational type stuff would just be Fix You, Low, and White Shadows, which is not enough out of 13 songs. So just I almost feel like I should give it a lower score than a 4.75, but I'll give it a 4.75 because maybe you like some of these singles also. But that's just kind of the concept. So in terms of the future, like Coldplay has dropped some records. I want to say that they at least dropped an album in 2021. I haven't kept immediate tabs on them. I do know of a good portion of their albums, but I'm gonna have to mess with them more. But I definitely did like certain prospects about this album.